Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today, we have a very special guest and someone who I've been looking forward to have on the show for the first time, Parker Lewis. But before we start the show, I want to give a very special shout out to the Bitcoin company that makes this show possible, Swan Bitcoin. Best place to build your Bitcoin stack. It's being built by Bitcoiners. It's for Bitcoiners. They incentivize dollar cost average and they incentivize self-custody. Definitely check out swanbitcoin.com today if you haven't already done so. All right, everybody, no more delay. Let's jump straight into it. Let me bring Parker up on stage. Hey, Parker, how you doing?
Doing well. Glad we could finally get together to do this. And sorry it took me so long to be here, but I'm very excited.
Well, no, dude, I'm a super fan of your work and your essays. Some of them that I remember you dropped while you were at Unchained, and it really made me kind of rethink about it. There was this piece. Basically, it was called the Great Definancialization. Sorry, English is my second language. But
it's a word I made up, I think, so it's not readily available.
But it explains a lot. It explains a lot, right? It was very kind of influential in my perspective of the world and my Bitcoin journey as well. But before we get into all of that, I really want to ask you about what's your take on the FASB's ruling today, in terms of basically, this was one of the three things that Michael Saylor said would be necessary in order to take Bitcoin to the next level. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a very logical move. It was a no-brainer. I think didn't read too much about it today, but I did see the news, and I believe the vote was unanimous. I'm not sure exactly how many votes there are, but that it was very clear that it was the right thing to do. I think that it reduces a source of friction, without doubt. Michael Saylor's talked about this quite a bit, but ultimately, for those people who are not familiar, what the rule and certain types of companies, and there's different standards for public companies and private companies, but the standard that public companies had adopted was, I think it was treated as a indefinite life intangible. And effectively what that meant was that companies that held Bitcoin on their balance sheet would have to market it effectively the lowest value it had ever traded at, and basically impair the Bitcoin. And then as it traded back up, they couldn't write the asset back up. And so what the FASB basically changed today was saying that companies could mark Bitcoin on their balance sheet at fair value. So as it goes down, they mark it down. As it goes up, they mark it up, rather than only marking it down and never marking it up. I think the reality of the situation is that does, I think, reduce some friction for some companies. I think if somebody was valuing a Square who has Bitcoin on their balance sheet, or a MicroStrategy, they were probably looking past that and being like, okay, they disclose how much Bitcoin they have, how much is actually worth. So I think the market was probably treating it from a mark-to-market basis anyways. But I think for accountants and for, kind of finance departments, treasury departments that are considered about their borrowing bases and their balance sheets, there's certain things that are tested against their balance sheet. So I do think that it reduces friction, particularly for large companies, large public companies, it simplifies things for them.
And and I have been following it for quite a while, right? And it put them like in this kind of predicament, right, where they couldn't accurately report a loss on the downturns, and it just became accounting. It was an accounting nightmare. So it de-incentivized companies to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Now, the other two things that Michael Saylor brought up, which would be major catalysts. Number one was the Bitcoin spot ETF, right? So we all know what's been going on with BlackRock in the news. We've been hearing it. We hear rumblings coming out of the SEC, how, it seems to me like they're running out of road. Like they're running out of excuses. They can only delay this for so long. The Grayscale lawsuit, they got defeated there. So what's your take on this whole situation? Do you believe it's politically motivated from the SEC? Why do you think they're taking so long to approve a spot Bitcoin ETF?
Yeah, I think that that I don't know if it's yeah, I guess in some way politically motivated or state motivated. I don't want to say politically motivated in the sense that I don't think it's one party versus another. I think it's more of the interests of the federal government and particularly the Fed Treasury impacting the SEC. And so I think that what I would say is it does feel like they're getting at the end of the road in terms of excuses, and that the conventional wisdom with the likes of BlackRock coming in is that an ETF will get approved very soon. I'm someone who is just cautious around that. I think that there are very large, powerful interests that ultimately do not want Bitcoin to um, continue to even incrementally gain ground and kind of be a potential future threat to the dollar. I think that is ultimately what it is, not in a threat in a bad way, but in terms of competition. It's providing an option for people to opt out of endless fiat debasement, like I think everybody who's paying attention to Bitcoin has figured out. But that has consequences for the Federal Reserve, for the Treasury Department, for FinCEN, and I think that currently the SEC is basically the fall guy or the front man for other interests within the federal government that would rather not see Bitcoin proliferate via an ETF. And so even though typically BlackRock gets what BlackRock wants, until an ETF is approved, I'm skeptical that it will happen in the short term. And I don't think people should not be making investment decisions as to whether or not an ETF is or isn't going to get approved. Like maybe it's inevitable in the long run, but Bitcoin replacing the dollar is also inevitable in the long run.
And I want to get to that last question because I completely agree. Opti, do you want to change the screens or should I? Thanks. And I want to get to that last question about Bitcoin inevitably replacing the dollar in the long run. I fundamentally believe that. But to go back to what you were talking about, and it whether it's the piece choke point Operation Choke Point 2.0, the wording coming out of the Treasury, they released a paper late last year called "The Future of Money and Payments," and that entire paper they did not mention Bitcoin. In fact, they trashed it a little bit. And in the eyes of the current administration, it's central bank digital currencies. We know the release of the Fed Now. I had Caitlin Long on the show I think it was either a month ago or so. And she said directly, the reason that the Custodia Bank got denied the federal banking charter, that order came directly from the White House, right? So I agree with you. I think that there's some elements in the federal government that do not want Bitcoin to succeed. Now, that leads me to my question to you, is the people that are in charge of so-called regulating the industry are also the people that stand the most to lose. How does that play out in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting to think about the different competing interests, right? Because you can look at the Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan's, BlackRocks of the world, kind of the private, but more and more quasi-public institutions, not just in terms of public shareholders, but kind of becoming more crony capitalists attached to the state in terms of co-opting the state to create regulatory capture. So I think that drawing the line between what's in the interest, because some people might say like JP Morgan has the most to lose. Reality is that everybody has the most to gain by adopting a Bitcoin standard. Companies that help on the financial services side, it's either adopt or die. So if they don't adopt, if JP Morgan doesn't adopt Bitcoin, if BlackRock doesn't adopt Bitcoin, they're more likely to fail quicker than if they were. Bitcoin will be a lifeboat for everybody. I think that the corporate interests or the private interests, even if they're becoming more quasi-governmental as too big to fail, is codified. That is distinct from the Fed and Treasury. And the Fed, while it is a private institution owned by the large banks, or maybe not necessarily the large banks and smaller banks, kind of a conglomerate of banks. It is the Fed is a quasi-public institution. The Treasury is a 100% public institution. And so I think that across those lines and chasms, you probably have a world where Treasury and FinCEN, totally like government interests, state actors, they 100% do not want Bitcoin. Their business is the dollar. The Fed, same thing, but you could look to a world where maybe the Fed wants to continue to exist and adopts Bitcoin. So I think it just exists on a spectrum. But I would distinguish the large interests that even though J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Bank of America and Citi, they might kind of seemingly have an interest to stop Bitcoin. I think it's more the pure government bodies that really extract kind of state-derived power from the dollar. And kind of derivative systems that the dollar can kind of co-opt that are really kind of creating the pushback from this, rather than the large private institutions that kind of control the government, but are distinct from it.
Gotcha. And how do we fight against that, so to speak, right? Like how do you fight against this administrative state that is funded by this endless money printer? How do you is it in terms of election? Is it in terms of getting people to adopt Bitcoin in the United States? Corey Clipson wrote a paper called "The Race to Avoid the War," where he makes the case about getting an intransigent minority in the United States. I think it's like 10 million Bitcoiners that are unwilling to bend in a certain issue. How do you? Is it an educational thing? Is it a lobbying thing? What's your take on that, Parker?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhere between too big to fail on Bitcoin side of like too many people have to adopt it, and where the interests become conflicted. I think I saw a tweet from Safe Dina Moose, or someone putting a tweet out that quoted him, that was, "Come for the greed, stay for the revolution." And I honestly, so I think it's like, it really is education, but it's education on the side of like people, kind of will generally adopt Bitcoin for fear of missing out. That fear of missing out is actually rational. Like they're following a market signal that's saying Bitcoin's not dying; it continues to increase in purchasing power over time. I either need to adapt or die. I either need to adopt this or not. And oftentimes, people first adopt Bitcoin for the reason that they're expecting their wealth to increase. As people fall further and further down the rabbit hole, there's this saying, which I think is 100% true. It's not true to 100% rule in all cases, but is that Bitcoin changes people more than people change Bitcoin. I think that's something we're seeing currently as people are trying to change Bitcoin, or at least certain of the consensus rules. But it's getting more people in and engaged of why they have an individual interest or a business interest to gain by adopting Bitcoin. And then once they're in the Bitcoin vortex, they become, on Team Bitcoin. And the more people that adopt it, the harder it is to stop. The more people in the government body that are holding Bitcoin individually, their interest is aligned to not fuck it up. The more people within J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, the Federal Reserve that own Bitcoin, the less likely they are to fuck it up, because ultimately they're going to align behind their own self-interest, and those self-interests are both personally and their businesses.
Yeah, and it's so it's in it. So my interpretation is it's a bottom up, right? It's an infiltration, so to speak, not in a bad way, because I feel like that has like a negative connotation attached to it, but it's adoption, right? The more people adopt Bitcoin in positions of power and influence, the more they're incentivized to act against it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I do think it's bottom up. Like when you use the term infiltration, it's like if people are educated on how Bitcoin can help them, at the individual level, at the family level, at the community level, at the business level, they will act in their own self-interest, and by acting in their own self-interest, everyone benefits too,
Gotcha.
because we're getting sound money. But it is that maybe not every person adopting Bitcoin is created equal, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If the CEO of General Electric or GM figured out why Bitcoin was money and why sound money was the key to their companies surviving and all their employees continuing to have jobs and their ability to build better cars. Well, that one CEO is figuring out Bitcoin may matter more than somebody down the line at GM or down the line at GE. And while Bitcoin solves a problem for everyone, kind of a rifle shot approach to get people that can otherwise stymie or put up roadblocks or make our lives more difficult, would be better, kind of accelerating their path to understanding Bitcoin. Like if you could get Jay Powell to figure out why his entire life has been a disaster, and that Bitcoin is the answer, like causing that domino to fall has far faster ripple effects than maybe somebody else learning about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, Nayib Bukele in El Salvador or Michael Saylor, bold in their own fronts, right? Nayib Bukele on the nation state level, Michael Saylor on the public company front. But yeah, I agree, right? Because they're proving that Bitcoin is a viable alternative to holding fiat or using fiat currencies. So I completely agree. Now, Parker, I come from I am extremely bullish for the next 5-10 years, just because I think that the next cycle, I think those two gentlemen, those two guys, are really going to prove. They're going to prove a lot of the mainstream consensus. I hate calling it mainstream. Really, the corporate media, better said, the corporate media narrative that Bitcoin is a bad thing. This is going to destabilize El Salvador. That's one of the things that I heard. Not so many attacks on Michael Saylor, but mostly on El Salvador. I think that by the next cycle, whenever it comes, it's going to be undeniable that these two gentlemen made the right decision. And then tie this in with the FASB news that dropped today and the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF. So to speak, figuratively, it really does seem like all the stars and all the planets are aligning for Bitcoin. Like I'm extremely optimistic and very, very bullish about the next couple of years. I think we might see something that we aren't expecting. Maybe I'm maybe I'm too optimistic, but that's my take. I would love to get your take.
I think that I do think that both of those individuals, Bukele and who I do not know, never talked to, only observing from afar, as well as Saylor, again, who I do not know well, but had a few conversations, that time will prove them to have been both bold and be rewarded for it. I think that that each one, I think, sets a precedent, and that they're not the only precedents that are important, but they are important precedents at the same time. And so I don't know if it's necessarily that the stars are aligning, but that the longer the Bitcoin kind of continues to move forward with each passing cycle, something else is true, which is that the fiat system is kind of nearer and nearer to its death throes. And that at the same time that the trains coming off the rails or wheels coming off the bus, whatever analogy you want to use, that Bitcoin development and adoption and knowledge distribution only continues to grow, that things will continue to accelerate, and things will become more and more obvious to more and more people, with kind of reaching a level where public companies are buying and holding Bitcoin and nation states are starting to adopt it, that Bitcoin can't be nothing and vaporware at the same time that these other things are true that are deeply fundamental. So I do think, but I think it will always be true that kind of Bitcoin always seems primed to take a more significant step forward, but that will always be the case as it gets larger and larger. And also, I think it's the government media, not the corporate media.
Interesting. What makes you say it's the government? Again, supposedly these are private companies.
Yeah, but I'm saying they're co-opted by the government. As we saw post lockdown, and how they push pharmaceuticals, and how everybody basically becomes like fan champion. Everyone who's a fan of the media is now suddenly a fan of like Pfizer. Like Pfizer's like the best things and sliced bread, that basically the large corporation interests are co-opted by the government.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and you see that like on the war footing too. I remember seeing a tweet from, I think it was like Jack Posobiec, and he said something like along the lines of, if social media existed in 2003, there would be a big probability that we wouldn't have gone to war with Iraq. And the reason I'm saying that is because it was originally the New York Times that dropped the art. It's the same New York Times, by the way, that is attacking Bitcoin. But it was originally the New York Times that dropped the infamous article that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and that started a domino effect. So I like that. It's not so much corporate media; it is government media. So you said something earlier that I kind of wanted to double back on, because you said it with such confidence, and it was. You said, look, but and it was in a way it was nonchalant, but it was very confident. I really want to focus on that, which is, you said Bitcoin. I'm paraphrasing or I'm misquoting, but you said basically like Bitcoin will replace the dollar. Like you said it as a matter of fact. Why do you believe that so strongly? What makes your conviction so high?
So I would say that my one, it's certainly not out of hubris. It's one out of logic and reason. And that on my own journey to Bitcoin, I first came to the conclusion that the dollar was irreparably broken, that it was broken beyond repair, and that it was going to end in hyperinflation, and that was a problem for the entire world, but particularly anybody using the dollar. And the dollar is the best fiat currency. So anybody using the euro yen has a similar problem. Anybody who's like lucky enough to have reasonably reliable money today is in a better position than people that don't. But that money system is broken. It's broken because of the degree of leverage. It's broken because it became co-opted by central third parties, central banks, but then the banks that control them. And so I started from the point that the dollar was broken, the dollar's going away. So then the question, if you come to that conclusion independent of Bitcoin, which I did, then you start to look and try to figure out, well, what the answer is, what is going to replace it. And from my side, and the reason why, and I don't say it nonchalantly, or I don't say it in a way that is to overlook a lot of assumptions that are built into it, but that there's actually a finite surface area to evaluate the problem, and it's Bitcoin's fixed supply. And that if you can start to understand or formulate as to how Bitcoin credibly enforces its fixed supply, and you start to develop conviction in that, which I believe is a known or knowable question. You can know it to a degree, and you can also develop high degrees of conviction in it. The more that you study it, the more time that you observe it, that if that fixed supply is credible, that money, and the most important property of it is that it store value over time, that it intermediates a series of transactions from the present to the future, and it does so identically for all individuals, or at least that being the identical problem of intermediating a series of present transactions to the future, present exchanges to the future. That the most important property of a form of money to storing value is its supply and its supply constraints, and that if Bitcoin is actually a form of money that is finite in supply, that can't be increased at all, and if all these other dollar, euro, yen, yuan, peso systems are broken, the world is going to have to adopt another form of money. And I came to the conclusion, based on kind of years of research, but also years of experience of developing a very hard conviction around the fact that Bitcoin is able to credibly enforce its fixed supply. And I think the other thing is that it's not subject to some technological silver bullet where something could happen tomorrow and the whole Bitcoin network just fall apart. That Bitcoin's, because of its decentralized architecture, redundant architecture, that there is no software, hardware, silver bullet, technological silver bullet that could cause a 21 million fixed supply to break down. That the fixed supply is credible, and that if Bitcoin does credibly enforce its fixed supply, that the entire world will adopt it as a global reserve currency. So it's kind of two parts. It's the system is broken. It's obviously broken for people that are paying attention. It's going away whether Bitcoin is here or not. And the world's going to have to adopt a new form of money. It's going to adopt the form of money that has a fixed supply. I developed conviction around how Bitcoin enforces its fixed supply. that it is credible, and that it's also not that it's not subject to technological failure. It's more subject to social failure or social co-option, but that as we see time and time again, that that Bitcoin is sufficiently decentralized to withstand even state level co-option. And I say that based on like when China banned Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining has doubled in a half since that happened. India tried to ban Bitcoin exchanges. First, people still use Bitcoin in India, but then their Supreme Court overruled it. If the same thing happened in the United States, Bitcoin would continue to work. Its working is predicated on its ability to continue to work regardless of what any government ever tried to do or intended to do.
Yeah, 100%. And forgive me for saying nonchalant, but it was just the confidence of which you said that statement. I had a feeling that there was what you said. There was some conviction behind it. There was some reasoning. There's some logic behind it. That's why I asked it that way. So one of the things, Parker, and by the way, I completely agree with you. I think I do believe in my heart, I think Bitcoin is inevitable. I think its incentives show that when the China ban happened, right, that no central authority was telling those Bitcoin miners to relocate. It was just Bitcoin's mere incentives alone. And the other side, the CBDC side, fiat side truly has coercion. That's their tool, right? Bitcoin has incentive, which I think is going to win in the long run. Now, one of the things I never forget this. Michael Saylor was on a podcast. I think it was with Natalie Brunell, and Natalie asked Michael Saylor what kept him up at night, and his answer was something that my girlfriend intuitively has brought up to me too. She's like, Nico, this is amazing money. I get it 100%, but what I'm noticing is that people just don't care. And that's something very similar to what Michael Saylor said. Michael Saylor said, people just don't care about sound money. Now, I think that in the developing world where people do not have an option to, it's not the reason that a lot of people adopt Bitcoin in the developed world, which is out of speculation or ideological reasons, but they adopt it out of necessity. So I'm extremely bullish on the developing world adopting Bitcoin, an alternative to fiat and state currencies. But what I'm seeing in the developed world is just like people are just like, they just don't care. They're distracted by the bread and circuses. They're strong. The inflation rate isn't big enough for people to start asking the question, what is money? So what's your take on that?
You're saying that of the developing world or the developed world?
The developed world. The developing world, that's the exact opposite. People are clearly seeking alternatives because they're incentivized to, or they don't have a stable fiat currency, so they're incentivized to seek alternatives. But in the developed world, I don't see that as much.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly I'm actually a little surprised to hear that, like from like what I've seen. I feel like that it's actually kind of like the cross section of people that care. Like I don't think, and maybe we'll have to, in history, people will write about this of like what were the commonalities of the people that saw Bitcoin for what it was, because I don't think it will necessarily be developed versus developing. I think it will have something to do with like kind of freedom, personal responsibility, like the drive to improve their own individual interests, and that whether it's developed world or developing, or whether it's like you look at one billionaire and Jack Dorsey gets it, you look at another billionaire, Elon Musk, and doesn't, that there's an equal opportunity, that it's not an IQ test, it's not a wealth test, it's probably tied more deeply into kind of people's desire to be free and their desire to better themselves. And that I wouldn't agree. So, not that I disagree with Saylor that says that people don't care. I think it's that either people have never had a good form of money and don't understand what it could offer them, or in the developed world, it's that it's taken for granted and they don't understand that they have a problem. And so in my experience, the people who have created their own wealth, people who built a business and know how hard it is to create value, they get Bitcoin and they will respond to incentives much quicker than, say, someone that's either inherited wealth or somebody that works in the financial system. That the system's, kind of like they're almost incentivized to have their blinders on. But that somebody that's run a business, that's had to like fight tooth and nail to get everything they've got, and that has every interest to preserve that wealth, that it's actually the people that have wealth and something to lose, in my opinion. Like, if money stores value over time, I like to say, like, the developing world probably has the most to gain. Well, the developed world has the most to lose. And generally, in my experience, that the people that have something to lose, that's actually a greater incentive, because if money's storing value, that like, if somebody's life is generally improving, that's marginally less of an incentive than someone's going to have everything taken away from them. And so I don't really think that it's developed versus developing. I think that it's more just that, like, it's a hard problem. People don't know how good they have it, or don't know how good they could have it if they don't have a good form of money. And so that it's really a function of education, and that that the way to communicate to people on either side is that the people in the developed world, it's like needing to understand that they have a problem, and if they don't solve it, they're going to they stand to lose a lot. And on the other side, it's, in the developing world, like, hey, there's a tool that can help you improve, more than you could think without this, and you have more to gain. You have a lot to gain. So I think it's, the reverse side of the same coin, and that everyone will benefit. But that understanding what is money, I think we all, anybody who's gotten on the other side of the Bitcoin chasm, accepts that if you could go to your former self and before that it clicked, recognizing that it's an incredibly difficult problem to zero in on, like being able to see Bitcoin for what it is, and just accept that that's true for everybody, and that everyone's going to get there. And the more that people educate and talk about the importance of sound money, like, what is true is that people don't unget Bitcoin. They don't see Bitcoin and then not see it. And that every day it's just stacking. More people are getting it. Yes, somebody can go awry and start, doing shit coins after being a, quasi Bitcoiner, but they probably were never a Bitcoiner in the first place if they did. But what's probably more true is every day somebody is falling down the rabbit hole. We just can't see it observably day to day, but it's absolutely happening, because knowledge distributes as a function of time. So it's not that they don't care, it's just that they don't know, because it's either been taken for granted or it's not existed before. And it's just, there's no shortcuts.
Yeah, and the reason I framed it the way I did, Parker, is just based on the stats, right? Like, there was a headline the other day that's like 52% of Turks have it, to use the article's own words, have invested in cryptocurrencies. You see the numbers coming out of Nigeria, it's the high 30s. You see the numbers coming out of Venezuela, you see the numbers coming out of Argentina. It's very, very high compared to the developed world, which is why I asked it the way I did. But I agree with you. I think that it's equal opportunity, 1,000,000%. But it just doesn't seem it doesn't seem to worry you that it seems like you're confident in the developed world that they're going to pick it up because they have the most to lose.
Yeah, and they also have access to the most information, right? If you look at a node map or a density of nodes, where, like, it maps to that. And it also makes sense. I think a lot of times people, like, want to show up to the shores of Venezuela and be like, Bitcoin will solve all your problems. And people are like, I need to figure out how to eat and get power and get clean water. And they're like, what is this Bitcoin going to do for me? Right? Like, it's not going to deliver, it's like, and it's a long game. But the reality is, like, imagine somebody who can go home tonight and under a good roof with reliable either air conditioning or heating and clean water and food, and sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to take an hour or two to read an essay or a book and think about this problem. What is money? Like, think about that person, and then think about the person that is in, hyperinflationary Venezuela, thinking, okay, I don't have access to clean water. The grocery stores are empty. I I don't have reliable healthcare or power, and you want me to sit down and think about, how I'm going to, how sound money is going to better me. I'm thinking about tomorrow or the next day. So my point is, it's actually easier for people that have that time and comfort. Now it's going to benefit both sides equally, and that's why it is like, it's not like creating chasms, but it is fundamentally harder when you are in an environment where things are less stable economically to adopt something like Bitcoin. So I'm just like being realistic, that where it's like, hey, there's no shortcuts to bootstrapping an economic system, and that where there is knowledge and technology more, like you look at how any form of technology is adopted and then distributed through the world. It generally goes one way, from the developed world to developing. I believe the same thing will be true, even if certain developing parts of the world might skip over other forms of technology, like sitting down and understanding Bitcoin and running nodes and getting hardware wallets, and building mining infrastructure, things like that that'll naturally happen in certain places of the world. And I do think that's okay. It's like the entire world's going to get there, and we don't necessarily need to focus on kind of one segment or the other. It's like, hey, putting the bat signal out of like, hey, this thing Bitcoin's great for everybody. Anybody who wants to learn about it, equal opportunity, opt in. If you're a CEO, great. If you're going to build a small business in Venezuela, great. Here are the tools to learn about it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought Venezuela up. I'm originally from Venezuela. My parents are
Oh,
from
really?
Venezuela. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, it's I love that you used that example. But yeah, I agree with you. If you're hungry, if you don't have if you don't have if you don't even have a way to pay for food, it's difficult to think about other things.
Yeah, and the other
Um,
thing I do want to say is like, I'm by no means like that. Bitcoin's still the only path out
yeah.
for writing hyperinflation. So like, people ultimately have to figure out how to do both, which is like, I got to figure out how to eat and I got to figure out how to save Bitcoin. So I'm not saying like, oh, well, like, and they shouldn't learn about Bitcoin. I'm just saying that like, there's certain things about the reality of that situation that should actually make it easier for somebody in the developed world to do it. But the other side of the coin is true too, that they feel this sense of comfort that they don't have a problem. So it's not as front and center. So they pick up the book and read about Bitcoin today. But yeah, I just want to make that kind of clear, that it's like, hey, it's not that kind of the developing world and places that are going through economic instability and currently hyperinflation aren't going to have to figure out how to adopt a hard money standard, or are going to have to adopt a Bitcoin standard. They are. It's just to say like, it's not as easy as some people in their kind of glass towers, ivory towers, however you might want to think about it, to be like, oh, just adopt Bitcoin and Bitcoin will fix it.
Of course. Yeah, no, of course. I completely agree with that. Parker, you had an amazing presentation at BitBlock Boom. Opti and I were hanging out backstage, and we were holding down the news deck, so we watched the entire thing through video. It's called Beginning of the End, if I'm not mistaken. Where are we in Bitcoin adoption in your view?
So it's beginning of the end game, and
Beginning of
so
the end game.
yeah, so the end game in my view is Bitcoin as the primary currency that's facilitating day-to-day transactions, facilitating direct commerce. Currently, Bitcoin is kind of a nascent and volatile store of value. The end game is it's being used in direct commerce to buy groceries at the grocery store, gas at the gas station, healthcare, power, water, everything being traded for Bitcoin. So that's the end game. What that end game ultimately means is that it's a unit of account, or said more plainly, that it's the currency that everything is denominated in. And not just exchanged in, but also priced in and denominated. So Bitcoin as a price system where everything in the world is priced in Bitcoin is the end game. And the reason why I say that we're entering the end game, or that the end game is beginning, or it's the beginning of the end game, is that from my own vantage point, both from the kind of the fragility and instability of the fiat system, as well as just what I'm seeing day to day amongst Bitcoiner and the focus of the infrastructure that's being built is that we're at the point where a much larger percentage of people are not just going to be storing a small amount of wealth in Bitcoin, but that more people are going to be proactive in starting to receive Bitcoin as payment in exchange directly for goods and services, rather than just convert Bitcoin for fiat currencies. That, for me, kind of seeing the rapid bank failures, seeing the increase in inflation all over the world, those are all signs of the fiat system failing. And kind of thinking about the mentality of, well, what would you do or what would you build if your access to your bank was no longer there, or reliable access to the bank. And that Bitcoin is much more than just a speculative asset. It is a better form of money. And we're entering the stage where I think in a much more broad-based way, people are going to start saying, you know what, I'm not willing to take the risk. And it's not to say that the dollar is going away tomorrow. I just think it's going away a lot sooner than people might think. And even if it doesn't, that the point of where we're at in terms of Bitcoin's maturity, of what I'm seeing, with my eyes every day, is more people trying to figure out how to adopt Bitcoin. That's currently what I'm working on at Zap Right. That is the end game, and it's kind of two sides of the same coin: fiat instability, fiat fragility, bank failures, inflation, general sign that things aren't working for people, and saying, okay, well, if these things are as fragile and unstable as they are, we need to start building redundancies and building the infrastructure that can allow us to really freely facilitate exchange with Bitcoin and not having to route through financial institutions.
Gotcha. Okay. So my question to you, Parker, would be, so it's transitioning, store value has currently seen transitioning to a medium of exchange. Now, what the main talking point from central banks, it literally doesn't come out of my head. It's just, it's too volatile, right? And also volatility to on the way up too. People are not really incentivized to spend their Bitcoin. What would your response to that? Are you saying that over time the volatility will decrease?
Well, in an end state, yes, the volatility will be gone. When the entire world has adopted Bitcoin, and like if you think about it, imagine 1% of people have adopted Bitcoin, which is not true, probably, like it's less than that. But what that means is, say there's 8 to 10 million people, which I think is also too high, that grok Bitcoin. Let's just be honest and say that there's less than 1 million people that grok Bitcoin in the world. Maybe it's 5 million, but I doubt it. If you just poll test the people in your day-to-day life. But my point is that if Bitcoin adoption is going to increase by 1,000x, okay, Bitcoin adoption is increased by 1,000x or 10,000x, then the marginal adoption from there is going to be very limited. But once the entire world has, at the point where the entire world has adopted Bitcoin, not going to be volatile. Just like it's going to be, back when money used to be stable, it's hard to claim that the dollar is stable today. It's still more, quote, stable than everything else, but it's stably losing its value, right, at an increasing rate. That my point is, at that end state, when the whole world's adopted Bitcoin and everything's priced in Bitcoin, Bitcoin's the not volatile thing. Everything else is volatile. Bitcoin isn't. It's the true, like, 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. So that's the end state. Bitcoin isn't volatile, and Bitcoin will be freely traded. Even in the interim of us getting there, there will increasingly be an incentive for people to trade in Bitcoin. There's certain, and the talking point that I had in the presentation was that it's going to be the merchants that drive it. It's not going to be the consumers that say, I want to pay you in Bitcoin. It's going to be you saying, no, I want to be paid in Bitcoin. If you want to pay me in fiat, fine, but I'm going to charge you more. If you want to pay me in Bitcoin, I'm going to give you an incentive to, but that in that world, because I talked about the specific thing in the presentation. It's on one hand, it's irrational to spend an asset that's appreciating when you can spend an asset that's depreciating. So it's more rational to spend $1 than it is to spend a Bitcoin. That's in kind of the theoretical world. But if I have a critical, quote, supplier that I need to be around, like my rancher, and my rancher here in Austin says, I'm willing to accept Bitcoin, I would like you to pay me in Bitcoin. It's perfectly rational for me to pay my rancher in Bitcoin because I actually need food just as much, and maybe if not more, than money. The point that I have money is to be able to get food. So if I save all my Bitcoin and spite my rancher, and then my rancher goes away, we are both worse off in that equation. But in a more broad principle, if somebody that you expect wants the Bitcoin, is saving in Bitcoin, and they give you the option to pay you in Bitcoin and you don't, you're going to have a moral dilemma on your hands. You're going to know that a Bitcoin business asks you to pay them in Bitcoin and that you were too selfish to do that, and that you thought, well, no, you should get the fiat and then go through the problem of converting it to Bitcoin. I won't do that for you. I won't just pay you Bitcoin directly when you've asked me to do that. And so a great example of this was, and I talked about this at
the incentive structure, right? I love
yeah,
that. Yeah.
well, right, the incentive structure of being able to charge more, but also even without that, Jimmy Song was at BitBlock Boom selling his books, and he gave people the option to pay him in Bitcoin or side by side to pay him in fiat without any incentive. And 85% of the sales were in Bitcoin. So when Bitcoiners walked up to that table and they had the ability to pay dollars, which would be less friction for themselves, value for value, mutual respect, they overwhelmingly said, you know what, Jimmy wants dollars. Jimmy, the author of Fiat Ruins Everything, and Bitcoin and the American Dream. Thank God for Bitcoin. Am I really gonna am I gonna stare at this guy and show him that I'm paying him in Bitcoin in dollars? Do I not have enough mutual respect for him to pay the man in Bitcoin when he's saying pay me in Bitcoin? So it's both rational to do that, and there's this moral dilemma that once Bitcoin is out. Now, it isn't. If you think that the guy on the other side is just going to convert it directly to dollars, pay the people in dollars. There's no sense, if I have dollars and somebody else wants dollars, for me to go through the morass of paying them in Bitcoin. But if there's a Bitcoiner, a merchant on the other side, and that's where I think it will be driven from, it will be the merchants that are delivering value, that figure out why Bitcoin is sound money and why the dollar is working against their interests, that say pay me in Bitcoin. Bitcoiners will pay them in that, and it is rational to do that. It's rational to have your suppliers that you're going to rely on, like my rancher, be around in 5 years, 10 years, because you're spiting yourself if you're not. You're being high time preference.
And oh man, I love the way that you broke it down. Yeah, I completely agree. It's so interesting, phenomenon, because we outsource a lot of our media, and to contractors all around the world, and there's a very interesting phenomenon, which is we don't even need to know these people's names, right? Like, we can just go by their handle. We could judge their proof of work. We could send them sats because they're contributing to us, and we don't even need to really know their identity and stuff. And that wouldn't be possible with fiat. Maybe you could say it's possible. You could maybe set up like an email account or something like that. But what I'm trying to say is it's definitely not as easy. It's not
as easy. And it's like when you're paying people out in Bitcoin, like, you're doing it because someone's delivering value to you. And if someone's delivering value to you, it's like, you could figure out, you could be selfish and be like, you know what, I'm going to pay you. And I'm going to figure out, send me your personal information. I'm going to send you, your dirty fiat. But you're like, no, you're a Bitcoin and you're delivering value to me. Yeah. I'll deal with the friction of like having potentially a tax on it, figuring that whole thing out, because what's most important is I give you value for value. I respect kind of this mutual idea of creating value.
So in honor of you being here, Parker, I'm going to pull up Opti's in the chat going wild. We're going to charge extra for merch payments and fiat. That's right. We're going to change our payment structure. We're going to charge 10% more for our merch if you guys pay in fiat. Thanks for bringing that up, Parker.
This was a question that I got at BitBlock Boom, where it's like, hey, are you going to give people the option to have a discount if they pay in Bitcoin? And I said yes, but with this very important distinction, which I think we really need to reframe this. It's not I'm giving a discount to pay in Bitcoin. It's like, I'm charging a premium if you want to pay in fiat, because there's actually more friction to me if you, customer, want to pay me in fiat, and I got to go through the morass of getting through the dollar financial system, paying all the fees, dealing with the holes, dealing with the chargebacks, to then get it back over to convert it to Bitcoin, please just pay me in Bitcoin. But if you don't want to, you can pay 5% more, 10% more, 20% more. You're basically able to signal to your customer, hey, this is the price of the good, but if you want to pay in fiat, it's actually more. That's different than applying a discount, because it's like, why should someone pay less for a better form of money? It's no, you're paying more for fiat because you're delivering me money that has greater friction, that I'm going to have to go do more work to get it into Bitcoin, which is what I actually want. And so I do think it's like, it might seem subtle, but it's actually the right framing of like, the price of the good is X. If you're paying in fiat, it's actually 10% more, whatever you think the trade-off is.
All right. Well, Opti, you heard that. You heard that. We gotta charge a premium if people pay in fiat.
No Bitcoin discounts, surcharge premium if you're paying in fiat.
Surcharge. I love
and
that.
It's not related to a card. It's the currency. You gotta be specific. It's about the currency you're paying in. Like, that's the limiter.
I love that. All right, we're gonna put all caps, no discounts, Bitcoin surcharge for the fiat inconvenience. I love that. Absolutely nailed it. So Parker, I was a huge fan of your work at Unchained. A lot of the articles that were dropping there. I know you were there for a while, and you're with Zap Right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So where is Parker Lewis these days? What is Zap Right for anyone who doesn't know? I'm just curious. I love Unchained. I think it's an amazing company.
I do too.
And so how did your heart take you to Zap Right? What made you, what eureka moment did you have? And before you answer that, what is Zap Right in the first place for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah, so one, Zap Right's a payments company. We help businesses, individuals businesses that are selling goods and services online, or invoicing other businesses, or individual contractors invoicing businesses to receive payment in Bitcoin. The key thing is that we never touch our customers' money. It's a SaaS service. We're wallet agnostic. Basically, we run the server. People are able to connect wallets, either non-custodial, custodial, Lightning on-chain, to basically be able to receive Bitcoin payments. So they can either issue a business invoice for services, or they can create a payment link to sell a good or service, or like an event ticket, something like that online. We basically make it easy for them to do, and then create the business record keeping, reporting tools, fulfillment management systems to be able to shift to a Bitcoin standard. So it's not a Lightning company, it's a Bitcoin payments company focused primarily on two types of payments: e-commerce and business invoicing. So, but the path to getting there, really, I stepped back from Unchained late last year, so over 9 months ago. I really did that to focus on turning Gradually Then Suddenly into a book, and just kind of get a little bit more control over my kind of day-to-day, and being able to get that out. One of the realizations I had was that I would never have gotten the Gradually Then Suddenly book done, which is going to be formally in print next month. And so it's all kind of related. It was like when I stepped back from Unchained, there was no inkling that I was going to work on Zap Right. It was that I was going to work on my book, which I did. In the process of working on my book, I wanted to drop a new article, which I did, which was called "Bitcoin is Not a Hedge." And at that time, I wanted to receive Bitcoin payments through my blog. And I just thought what I wanted to exist didn't exist, or, well, I didn't think that. What I wanted to exist didn't, and what I thought should exist didn't. And that's what ultimately led me to talking to John McGill, the founder of Zap Right. And Zap Right was probably closest to what I would have built if building from scratch. And the idea was, Zap Right runs the server. We can bring our wallet. Like, what I thought should have existed was, I connect a way to receive Lightning payments. I drop in an XPub as a way to derive Bitcoin addresses that go directly to me. And basically, you make the complicated part of running a server easy for me, but you make the Bitcoin go directly where I want it without getting in the flow of funds between me and my money. And so just kind of a line behind, kind of the vision of Zap Right being really focused on enabling payments, but enabling payments for Bitcoin does not mean needing to, quote, process payments, or needing to kind of be burdened with all the regulatory costs and the cost of privacy if all you want to do is start receiving Bitcoin payments online. And so kind of align behind kind of the product strategy with John, the founder, and also my good friend Will Cole, who's also working. He's head of product functionally, and I'm head of business development, out of kind of like taking Zaprite to market. But in short, it's like anybody who's small to medium-sized business, contractor, selling a good or service online that wants to receive Bitcoin payments, we can help them without being a payment processor, and can do that in a way where they can bring their own wallet, and that we're wallet agnostic. So really, it's kind of eating our own dog food. I wanted to be set up to receive Bitcoin payments on my blog. I adopted a method that I thought was a little bit more complicated and more frictionful than most people would be willing to do the same, and we wanted to help solve that problem. So our goal is to help not be competitive, but to help expand the market 100x, 1000x, 10,000x in terms of the number of people that will actually say pay me in Bitcoin, and enable them with the tools to do so.
Gotcha. And what is the differentiator between, like, for example, like, because we went through this relatively recently when we were setting up the merch shop. Initially, we were going to do it sovereign, and we did end up doing with the help of Start9. I think I have the pure version or whatever, and we were able to set up a sovereign version of receiving Bitcoin on chain. But the Lightning, man, like, that was like, it's not that we wouldn't have been able to figure it out, but it is not intuitive, right? It is not something that's like plug and play. It is like, and I know, and I was telling Opti out of frustration at the time, I was like, dude, like, if this is the best, like, forget about it. Like, we're in trouble,
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that, that there's people like you, and and just trying to figure out solve that problem, because I think it is a problem. So what would be the difference?
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, I think that problem is not easily solved, and that's not easily solved by Zaprite or anybody. It's solved by the entire market, I would say, of different parts of the value chain. I think that there's certain positive developments where, like, if you think about the problem, and this is also like why we're building Zaprite. We're not necessarily solving a liquidity problem of sovereign Lightning. So I want to be clear about that. But like, what you're keying in on is, like, if you think about yourself as a ardent Bitcoiner that is more technical than most, and you were kind of at your wit's end, then think about the next 100 people that aren't as technologically savvy or aren't as ardent to be like, you know what? I'm going to crawl through as much mud as I possibly can, and I'm going to get to the finish line. That most people do not have that pain threshold. And so you in order to enable more people to receive Bitcoin payments, you have to reduce the barriers. And there is, and I'm not saying this in an excuse-driven way, but like, if you start to understand the way that Lightning works, and the way that liquidity works, and the way that people's customers pay them, like, most people in a specialized economy, their customers, the people who pay them are not the people that they pay, and that it is very capital intensive from like a Bitcoin balance perspective to have one-way payment channels that are never replenished, and that it's just going to, like, the idea that every individual who pays a company is going to have a Lightning channel to that company, I think is like standing in the way in terms of like the way that payment flows really work. That there's some challenge there, and I'm hopeful that somebody will come with a solution. But I think that there's certain ideas like what Voltage is doing on being an LSP, where essentially you're able to like control the keys, or Mutiny, or Greenlight from Blockstream, where it's like, okay, let's start kind of like, we don't have to deliver all of this kind of value chain at once, which I mean, like with something like Greenlight or Mutiny, where you control the keys to something in a Lightning channel. So you're in control of the wealth, but somebody else is managing liquidity in and out, right? Like, that is better than just a full custodial solution, right? But some people might say, well, that's not fully sovereign. Well, that is a step towards that future world, and we need to be okay with that. But because if the bar was we need to deliver the tool so that someone can figure out their own liquidity, it's like that's not happening today. That will be an evolution, and we need to be okay with that, and figure out how we can kind of break down the barrier and take more offload, because most people who are running their business, they're running their business, and running a business is hard. And then asking them to be a Bitcoin IT professional is where most people shut down. And so I think it's to find the right balance to enable Bitcoin payments in a way where they control their wealth. And I put in my line in the sand of like, hey, if you can do it in a way where people like where they're in control in a no take backs way of the Bitcoin, let's start there. But also recognize that custodial Lightning will help enable Bitcoin payments, and we shouldn't, stand in the way of advancing those while we're building and reinforcing the other tools. So I did want to say that, and I'll answer whatever question you have, but I did want to be kind of clarifying on like where we basically provide the front end. We allow people to connect nodes. We enable people to drop in XPubs so that we can basically focus on the payment experience and have people receiving Bitcoin payments how they would like to, both custodially and non-custodially.
Gotcha. Very, very well. Very, very cool, man. It's really exciting stuff. The UI looks incredible. I love that. From my understanding, what I was looking, I love that you can plug in certain wallets. Because everyone has their wallet of choice, so to speak. I'm still an Electrum junkie, and people give me crap for that. But I like it. I know some people like Sparrow and some people like Blue Wallet, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Anybody who says Bitcoin doesn't have good design needs to check out Zap Right. Once you see a Zap Right payment link, you can go check it out at fiatruinseverything.com. You can try to be one of the last people to participate in Jimmy's crowdfund, which is ending today. But we are also helping to bring great design to Bitcoin.
Yeah, man, it looks very clean and important. Good design is very, very important, because that's how you make it. That's how you make it intuitive to people. That's how people adopt it. So we are at the top of the hour, Parker, and I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for joining us on SB IRL. You guys could check out Parker, his handle. Check out zaprite.com. And you also mentioned your book. So that's really, really exciting stuff. I did not know that. If I knew that, I would have prepared questions in regards to that. So if you want to give a quick shout out and quick synopsis of what it is and what it's going to be about and where people could find it.
Yeah, so it's adapting the Gradually Then Suddenly series, all the articles that you mentioned, adapting them into a book form, improving them, kind of knitting them together better. Also preserving a lot of the historical context and spirit. When I wrote the essays, for those people who are not familiar with my series, I wrote individual essays that could be read as standalones on individual concepts like Bitcoin's not too volatile, or Bitcoin's not too slow, or it's not for criminals. But the idea being that like sometimes people will read 10 pages about Bitcoin rather than a 300-page book, and kind of creating their own rabbit hole. So I've kind of adapted that framework of helping people understand Bitcoin 0 to 1 into a book. It'll be published under the same title, Gradually Then Suddenly. And people can learn about it more or participate in the crowdfund if they would so choose. I've got a website called graduallythensuddenly.xyz. And you could drop that in the show notes if you would. But people can go learn about the book. And the book in print form will be out in October. So I'm in the design phase, and then we'll be going to print once the design is completed in a week or two.
Awesome. All right. So we will put it in the show notes. Parker Lewis, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an honor. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we can get you back on the show in a couple months or so. And thank you so much, man, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Just let me know. I'll come back on. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Parker. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. We appreciate you guys. I won't be here for tomorrow's Simply Bitcoin Live. I'll be flying to Los Angeles, but Opti will be holding it down. I'll be back on Friday live from LA. But until then, love you all, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace out, everybody.